They laughed while the alien girl starved. Then one human said softly, "Come eat with me. Before we begin this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It helps more than you think." The Galactic Academy of Xenosciences was the crown jewel of the Andromeda Alliance, a temple of intellect and a battlefield of pride. Its silver spires pierced the violet skies of Nexus Prime, shining as a beacon that drew the sharpest minds from 1,000 worlds. Among the flood of ambitious newcomers was Lyra, the first Solaran ever to walk the halls of the Academy. But brilliance came with isolation. Lyra sat alone at the far edge of the cafeteria, her slender blue fingers trembling as she stared at the tray before her. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival, and she'd already lost a worrying amount of weight. The nutrient paste the Academy provided was tailored for the dominant races, Vidians, Taurians, and Nexians, but it was quietly poisonous to her Solaran biology. Each bite brought weakness, not strength. Her once bright eyes now glowed faintly, dimming like a dying star. When she reported her struggles, the administration called it an adaptational challenge, telling her to endure, because exceptions were never made, especially not for a species so new to galactic politics. At a nearby table, a group of Vidian students observed her suffering with cruel amusement. Their silver scales shimmered under the cafeteria lights as they whispered in their clicking, metallic voices. "Look at the Solaran trying to eat again," sneered Drex, the self-proclaimed leader. "She won't last another week before she quits, or starves." "They should have never let her kind in," hissed Vela, her dorsal ridges flaring with contempt. "Solarans barely qualify as spacefaring. What could they possibly offer the Alliance?" Their mocking was interrupted when Mason Reed, the only human at the Academy, entered the cafeteria. Humans were even newer to galactic civilization than the Solarans, having achieved faster-than-light travel barely 15 Earth years ago. Mason wasn't a typical student. He was part of a diplomatic exchange between Earth and the Alliance. And every day since orientation, he had noticed the blue-skinned girl sitting alone, growing thinner by the day. He'd heard the rumors, but until now, he hadn't acted. Today was different. Passing the Vidian table, Mason overheard their cruelty and saw the quiet pain in Lyra's eyes. Without hesitation, he changed direction and walked straight to her table. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, setting his tray across from hers. Lyra looked up, startled. "You are the human." "That's me, Mason Reed of Earth," he said with an easy smile. "And you're Lyra from Solaris Prime, first of your kind here." She nodded warily. "Why would you sit here? The others avoid me." "Because the others are idiots," Mason said bluntly. He glanced at her untouched food. "You haven't been eating." Lyra's voice was faint. "I cannot. The meal formula has zirconium compounds. For Solarans, they block nutrient absorption. It isn't fatal, but it is slowly killing me." Mason's expression hardened. "And you told the administration?" "3 times, she whispered. "They said I must adapt." Mason exhaled sharply, then reached into his bag. "Thought so. Here, try this." He slid a small sealed container across the table. "It's from Earth, no zirconium, I promise." Lyra hesitated, eyes flicking between him and the food. "Why share your sustenance with me? We are not clanmates or study partners." Mason smiled softly. "Because where I come from, we don't watch someone starve when we can help. And from what I've read, your biology isn't too far from ours. You should be fine." Lyra opened the container and stared at the strange assortment inside. Dried fruits, nuts, a small protein bar. Carefully, she lifted a dried apricot and bit down. The change was instant. Her eyes brightened, the glow spreading across her temples like living starlight. "This is compatible," she said, relief flooding her voice. "How did you know?" "Didn't," Mason admitted. "I study xenobiology for fun. Figured it was worth a try." Across the cafeteria, the Vidians watched with growing irritation. Drex's scales darkened as he sneered. "Look at that. The primitives are forming alliances now. How cute." Mason ignored him. "Don't mind them," he said to Lyra. "They've never had to fight for survival. Privilege makes people dull. Lyra continued eating, color returning to her face. This act of kindness will not be forgotten, Mason Reed of Earth. Among my people, the sharing of food creates a... She stopped mid-sentence. Drex and two other Vidians were approaching, their silver scales flashing with aggression. Drex's voice carried across the silent cafeteria. Your behavior disrupts the natural order of the Academy, he declared coldly. Every species must prove its worth without help. By aiding the Solaran, you undermine the very principles that hold this institution together. Mason calmly took a bite of his sandwich before replying. Interesting. I must have missed the part in the Academy charter that says starvation is part of the learning process. The Vidian's scales flushed a deep, angry crimson. Your primitive sarcasm changes nothing, Drex hissed. Both of you are here on conditional acceptance. The Alliance is still deciding whether your species even deserve full membership. Actions like this only prove you are not ready. Mason stood, meeting the Vidian's towering presence without flinching. Actions like what? He asked. Feeding someone who's starving? Where I come from, we call that basic decency. Drex sneered. Where you come from is a backwater world that only recently learned to leave its own sky. You humans think you're special because you evolved fast, but you're centuries behind. Mason smiled, the kind of calm smile that disarmed his opponent more than any insult could. You're right, Drex. We are behind in many ways, he admitted. But while you were perfecting faster than light travel, we were perfecting something else. Drex tilted his head mockingly. And what might that be? Adaptation, Mason said, his tone quiet but sharp. Humans thrive on hardship. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. Predators that could tear us apart. Weather that froze or burned us alive. And plagues that nearly erased us more than once. We survived because we adapted. Or we died. The cafeteria had fallen utterly silent. Dozens of alien eyes now watched as Mason's voice carried through the room. And the Solarans, he continued, nodding toward Lyra. They evolved under solar radiation storms that would annihilate most species here. Their cells regenerate under conditions we can barely study. So before you talk about who deserves to be here, remember, different worlds breed different strengths. Drex's companions shifted nervously, but their leader refused to back down. Impressive speech, human, he said with mock applause. But words don't change the fact that the Solaran is failing to adapt. Her weakness proves... It proves nothing, interrupted a firm, unfamiliar voice. Heads turned as Professor Naral Kale, the Academy's head of xenobiology, approached. The Turian professor's four eyes blinked in a slow, deliberate sequence as she surveyed the scene. Student Drex, she said coolly, were you explaining Academy traditions or publicly displaying your ignorance of interspecies biochemistry? Because from where I stand, it looks like the latter. Drex straightened instantly, his scales paling to a neutral tone. Professor Kale, We were simply... Enough, she cut him off. Turning to Lyra, her voice softened. Student Lyra, I was recently made aware of your nutritional issues. You have my sincerest apology. The standard meal plan is indeed incompatible with Solaran physiology. This oversight should never have occurred. Lyra blinked in shock. Thank you, Professor, but how did you know? Professor Kale glanced toward Mason. Student Reed submitted a detailed analysis of Solaran Earth biochemical compatibility to my department yesterday, along with a petition for meal plan adjustment, citing Section 14.3 of the Alliance Equal Education Act. Lyra's eyes widened further as Mason gave a sheepish shrug. Told you I've been studying xenobiology in my spare time, he said quietly. Professor Kale nodded approvingly. Effective immediately, the cafeteria will provide Solaran-compatible nutrition options. And as for you, Student Drex, her eyes narrowed, all four focusing on the Vidian. You will submit a 5,000-word dissertation on the ethical implications of biochemical discrimination in academic environments, by week's end. Drex's scales dulled to a sickly gray. Yes, Professor. When she left, so did the crowd's tension. The Vidians slunk away, and Lyra turned to Mason with awe in her luminous eyes. "You did this for me?" "Why? We were strangers." Mason smiled, resuming his lunch. "Because that's what humans do. We see a problem, and we try to fix it. Besides, if I'm going to spend 4 years here, I might as well make at least one friend." Lyra's facial markings shimmered a warm golden hue, the Solaran version of a blush. "Then I would be honored to be your friend, Mason Reed of Earth." From that day on, the two became inseparable. What began as a single act of kindness grew into a friendship that would change the Academy itself. Mason continued sharing Earth food until Lyra's dietary plan was officially approved, while she guided him through the labyrinth of alien customs and politics. Their bond inspired some and unsettled others. Students from overlooked species began seeking Mason's help. Conservative circles whispered their disapproval. Yet, change had already begun. 3 months later, as they studied for the Academy's most brutal test, the Xenoscience Practical, Mason sighed over a holographic anatomy chart. "I still don't get the Nexian respiratory system," he muttered. "It doesn't fit their planetary conditions." Lyra smiled, fingers dancing over her data tablet to project a 3D model. "That's because you're assuming natural evolution. The Nexians began modifying their own genetics nearly 3 millennia ago. Their current system is engineered." Mason let out a low whistle. "That would have saved me hours of confusion." "It was in the supplementary text," Lyra teased gently. "Perhaps if you spent less time petitioning the administration for others, you would have noticed." Mason laughed. "Someone has to." Mason shrugged. "Apparently no one thought to before." "That's not entirely true," came a voice from behind them. They turned to find Vela, the same Vidian who had mocked Lyra days earlier, standing uncertainly by their table. "May we help you, Vela Vidia?" Lyra asked, her posture instantly stiffening. Vela hesitated, her scales dimming from silver to pale blue, a Vidian sign of discomfort. "I wish to inform you that some of us have tried to raise these concerns before. The administration is resistant to change." Mason exchanged a glance with Lyra, his skepticism plain. "You've tried to help other species here?" "Not publicly," Vela admitted. "Our hierarchy rewards conformity and punishes deviation. But yes, some of us have seen the imbalance in the system." She placed a small data crystal on the table. "This contains 50 years of biochemical compatibility research across Alliance species. Some of the data isn't available in the Academy's public database. It might help with your examinations." Before either could respond, Vela continued quietly. "Drex and his followers represent only the old faction of our people. Not all Vidians share their views. Some of us believe the Alliance's survival depends on cooperation, not assimilation." Without another word, she turned and walked away. Mason exhaled slowly. "Well, guess we shouldn't judge a species by its loudest idiots." Lyra examined the glowing data crystal in her hand. "Perhaps there is more hope for reform than we thought." That evening they studied the crystal in the quiet of the library. Inside was more than data. It contained testimonies from students who had struggled with the Academy's rigid, species-blind standards. As the lights dimmed to signal curfew, Lyra looked up thoughtfully. "Mason, I have been considering something. The Xenoscience practical examination is meant to be completed individually, yes?" "Yeah," Mason said, glancing up from his notes. "Why?" "There is nothing in the regulations that forbids collaboration. In real fieldwork, teams are essential, because each species perceives and processes information differently. A Solaran can detect radiation levels invisible to a human, while you might notice environmental shifts that I would overlook." Mason smiled slowly. "So instead of competing, we prove that unity produces better results." "Exactly," Lyra said, her eyes glowing faintly. "A living demonstration of the Academy's own principles." Mason nodded. "We'll need more than just the two of us." "Perhaps," Lyra replied, glancing toward the hall where Vela had gone. We already have allies we haven't recognized yet. The day of the examination. The great hall buzzed with tension. Transparent walls revealed the violet skies of Nexus Prime, while rows of examination pods hummed softly in concentric circles. Representatives from across the Alliance filled the observation gallery, the eyes of a dozen worlds watching. Professor Kale stood at the center, her four eyes surveying the students with composed detachment. Welcome to the Xenoscience Practical Examination, she announced. Today you will demonstrate not just knowledge, but adaptability. Each of you will work independently within your assigned pod. Her gaze lingered on Mason and Lyra. You have 10 minutes to prepare. As the students dispersed, Mason and Lyra moved not to their pods, but toward Professor Kale. Professor, Mason began, we'd like to request a change to our examination parameters. Kale blinked, outer eyes in surprise, inner eyes narrowing. Explain. We wish to take the exam as a collaborative unit, Lyra said firmly. Real fieldwork depends on cross-species cooperation. Testing us in isolation teaches the opposite. Before Kale could respond, another voice joined in. We wish to join them, said Vela, stepping forward with two others, Crix, a crystalline Denvar, and Tila, a time-sensitive Cronian. A murmur swept through the room. Kale's four eyes widened slightly, the Terran equivalent of astonishment. Observers leaned forward in their seats. This is highly irregular, Kale said. The exam tests individual capability. With respect, Professor, Mason countered, the galaxy doesn't. Out there, survival depends on teamwork. Crix stepped forward, light refracting through their translucent form. The human speaks truth. My species perceives energy frequencies invisible to others, but I cannot process standard visual data. Collaboration is not a weakness. It is evolution. Kale hesitated, and then a sharp commotion erupted across the hall. Drex and a group of Vidians stormed forward, scales flashing in angry silver patterns. This is an outrage, Drex bellowed, ensuring every observer could hear. They seek to corrupt the sacred order of the examination. Individual merit has been the cornerstone of academy evaluation for over 7 centuries. The words echoed through the great hall, silencing the murmur of students and the low hum of the observation gallery. Every gaze turned toward the confrontation at the center. Mason caught sight of one observer in particular, an elderly Nexian draped in ceremonial silks, his facial ridges painted with the markings of high office. The man leaned forward, eyes glinting with keen interest. Professor Kale raised all 4 of her hands, her voice sharp. This is neither the time nor place for such a debate. On the contrary, came a resonant voice from above. All eyes lifted to the gallery as the elderly Nexian rose to his feet. The atmosphere shifted instantly. High Chancellor Morn of the Andromeda Alliance descended the steps, his elongated form gliding with ageless poise. The jeweled sash across his chest shimmered with the insignia of 100 worlds. High Chancellor, Professor Kale said quickly, bowing low. We are honored by your presence, but this is a minor academic dispute. That perfectly encapsulates the very question dividing our council for the past decade, the Chancellor interrupted smoothly. The issue of integration, whether new species are to be merely absorbed into the Alliance or truly included within it. He turned his sharp, silvered gaze toward Mason and Lyra. You propose a collaborative approach to this examination? Mason stepped forward, his voice steady. Yes, sir. We believe diversity isn't an inconvenience to be managed. It's a strength. Each species perceives the universe in unique ways. Combined, those perspectives create understanding no single mind could achieve alone. The Chancellor's facial ridges rippled faintly, the Nexian equivalent of deep contemplation. A bold assertion. He turned toward Drex. And you, young Vidian, you defend the traditional method. Drex straightened, scales gleaming in disciplined symmetry. The Academy's system has produced the Alliance's finest for centuries. To alter it now for the sake of newcomers would lower our standards and dilute our achievements. The Chancellor was silent for a long, heavy moment. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he looked back to Professor Kale. Then, let us test both visions. Allow each group to proceed as they choose, traditional individual evaluation, or this proposed collaboration. The results shall speak for themselves. Kale blinked, momentarily at a loss. High Chancellor, that would require modification of the protocols. You have 30 minutes, Morn said simply, before returning to his seat. A storm of activity followed. Instructors scrambled to reconfigure the systems while students whispered furiously among themselves. Some drifted toward Mason and Lyra's growing circle, curiosity and hope in their eyes. Others gathered around Drex, reaffirming their loyalty to tradition. By the time the adjustments were complete, 15 students, representing 11 different species, had volunteered for the collaborative trial. The rest, nearly 200, remained with the standard method. This is unprecedented, Lyra murmured, as they were escorted into a larger chamber. Its panoramic walls shimmered with the simulated glow of an alien sun. Mason grinned. Sometimes it only takes one person saying, "What if we did it differently?" to break centuries of habit. Besides, did you see how quickly the Chancellor jumped in? He's been waiting for something like this. Vela, walking just behind them, added quietly, "The Council's been deadlocked for years. Traditionalists demand assimilation, that all newcomers conform to existing norms. Progressives argue for accommodation, changing our systems to include new perspectives. The Academy is just a mirror of that conflict." "So this isn't just an exam," Mason said. "It's politics in disguise." "Precisely," Vela replied. "And the outcome could shape more than our grades." The collaborative examination. The simulation was far more complex than any individual test. Instead of isolated tasks, the team faced an entire star system, a network of newly discovered worlds with unique ecosystems and moral dilemmas woven into the data. They organized instinctively by ability, not by species. Crix and another crystalline Denvarian handled energy analytics, their translucent bodies pulsing in colors that mirrored the radiation they studied. The Cronians, with their accelerated perception of time, managed real-time monitoring of unstable variables. Lyra and 2 other Solarans mapped biochemical interactions, their innate molecular sensitivity identifying patterns invisible to others. Mason coordinated, bridging the gaps, translating across perceptual barriers, keeping communication flowing when logic faltered. At first, chaos reigned. 15 different languages, instincts, and sensory biases collided, but slowly order emerged. They built a shared lexicon, a rhythm, a team. Meanwhile, in the smaller pods across the hall, individual examinees worked in isolation, each locked in their own scaled-down version of the same simulation. Hours passed. Observers leaned forward in fascination. The Chancellor remained still as stone, his ancient eyes reflecting a faint, knowing glimmer. Then the voice of the examination system echoed through the chamber. "Final sequence initiating. Planetary destabilization detected. Determine optimal response within allotted time." The data feed spiked with red alerts. On screen, the simulated planet trembled beneath massive tectonic shifts triggered by a rogue gravitational anomaly. Entire biospheres teetered on the brink of annihilation. "Standard protocol dictates evacuation," Vela said instantly. "But the population is too vast and dispersed. Complete extraction is impossible." "The Nexian solution," said Lith, a young Nexian student, "would prioritize knowledge preservation, record the culture, archive the genomes, ensure continuity through data. But that strategy accepts catastrophic loss of life." Mason scanned the streams of data, eyes narrowing. "No, something's off. There's a pattern here we're missing. The gravitational readings don't match any natural phenomenon I've ever seen," Mason said, brow furrowing as lines of data scrolled across his console. Lyra joined him, her luminous eyes flickering with intensity. "You're right. These fluctuations aren't random at all. They're patterned. Artificial." They spoke the realization in unison, and in that instant, the entire team came alive. If the planet's collapse was engineered, then it could be undone. The Denverians immediately began running energy simulations, their crystalline bodies pulsing with shifting hues as they tested counter-frequencies. The Cronians, moving through time at accelerated speeds, mapped exact synchronization intervals for a planetary-scale intervention. "We'll need a delivery system," Mason said, scanning through models at rapid pace. "Something precise enough to hit every gravitational focal point simultaneously." Vela's scales shimmered with excitement. "Vidian terraforming tech," she said quickly. "It was designed for planetary stabilization. We can reprogram it to project counter-frequencies." Lyra's expression brightened. "And solar and biochemical catalysts could amplify the wave propagation through the planet's mineral core. Our compounds are optimized for energy resonance in high-density materials." As data streamed around them in a blur of color and light, Mason glanced across the room. The chaos of different species working side by side had transformed into harmony. No single culture could have solved this alone, but together they were more than the sum of their parts. When the final sequence ended, the simulation's voice filled the chamber. "Examination complete. Both approaches have achieved successful outcomes." A silence fell before the results appeared on the main screen. The individual examinees had saved a portion of the simulated population through mass evacuation. But the collaborative team, they had stabilized the planet itself, preserving not only its people, but their world, their culture, and their future. The hall exploded in murmurs and astonished whispers. Professor Kale's attempts to restore order barely cut through the noise, until the High Chancellor's voice did. "Fascinating," he said, his words carrying effortlessly across the chamber. "Both groups succeeded, but their paths reveal something far greater." Descending from the gallery, his presence commanded instant silence. The individual participants acted within the framework they were given. They preserved life but not context. Meanwhile, this team, he gestured toward Mason and Lyra, chose cooperation over convention. They combined their strengths, challenged assumptions, and achieved the impossible. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the silent hall. The Andromeda Alliance was built on the belief that many species, working together, could accomplish more than any one civilization alone. But somewhere along the way, we began to confuse unity with uniformity. True diversity is not about coexistence, it is about integration. It is about learning from perspectives that differ from our own. Turning to Mason and Lyra, his tone softened. When this human shared food with a starving Solaran, it was not charity, it was understanding. An acknowledgement that the system, not the individual, must adapt. That compassion is as vital to progress as intellect. A tense voice broke the silence. Drek stepped forward, his scales dulled to a hesitant green. "High Chancellor, with all respect, you can't be suggesting we discard centuries of proven methods because of one experiment. The Academy's traditions have built our civilization." The Chancellor nodded thoughtfully. "And those traditions will remain. But excellence evolves, Student Drex. What you call change, I call growth. We do not abandon what has served us well, we expand it. The future demands both innovation and respect for legacy." He turned to Professor Kale. "I am formally recommending the creation of a collaborative xenoscience track, a program designed to nurture interspecies research and shared problem-solving. Its graduates will stand equal with those from traditional disciplines." The hall erupted once again, though now the noise carried excitement rather than outrage. Professor Kale composed herself, nodding firmly. "As you wish, High Chancellor. The development will begin immediately." As the crowd dispersed into clusters of hushed conversation, Mason stood surrounded by the faces of his team, exhausted, exhilarated, and awed. "We've made history," Vela said, her scales glowing with a vibrant iridescence Mason hadn't seen before. Lyra's eyes shone softly. "More than that. We've proven that difference isn't an obstacle. It's the source of strength itself." Before Mason could reply, Drex approached their group. His posture was rigid, but his tone was subdued. "Human," he began. "I wish to speak with you." The room quieted as Mason stepped forward. "Go ahead." "I wish to acknowledge that your methods showed merit," Drek said stiffly, his scales flickering with discomfort. "While I still believe in our traditions, my behavior toward the Solaran was unacceptable." Mason glanced toward Lyra. "Then perhaps you should tell her that." Drex turned to face her, lowering his head. "Solaran Lyra, I offer a formal apology for my conduct. It was unworthy of both the Academy and my species." Lyra regarded him for a moment, then inclined her head gently. "Acknowledged, Drex of Vidia. Growth begins with understanding." Mason smiled faintly, sensing that this, more than any exam or lecture, was the true beginning of change. Lyra's facial markings shimmered softly as she regarded Drex. "Apology accepted, Drex of Vidia," she said, her tone gentle but dignified. "And perhaps there's something for all of us to learn from this." "Perhaps," Drex admitted. He hesitated, then added, "The High Chancellor has asked me to serve on a student advisory council for the new collaborative track. I believe your perspectives would be valuable, if you'd consider joining." Mason and Lyra exchanged surprised glances. "We would be honored," Lyra replied formally, a faint smile playing across her features. As Drex departed, Mason shook his head in disbelief. "Well, that was unexpected." "Not entirely," Vela said, her scales glinting with a knowing shimmer. "Drex is many things, but a fool isn't one of them. He can sense the winds shifting, and right now those winds are blowing toward change." Lyra's eyes brightened with excitement. "Speaking of change," she said, turning toward Mason, "I received a transmission this morning from the Solaran Diplomatic Council. They heard about our work during the examination. They've invited us both to speak at the next Alliance Summit on interspecies education." Mason blinked. "Both of us? But I'm just a first-year student. I don't even have diplomatic status." A familiar voice spoke from behind them. "You have something far more valuable." They turned to see Professor Kale approaching, her 4 eyes blinking in ceremonial sequence, a sign of deep respect in Tellurian culture. "You've demonstrated the tangible value of human perspective," the professor continued. "Your ability to adapt, to connect patterns across disciplines. That is what the Alliance needs. The Academy will be granting you both special research status to further develop your collaborative methods, and one more thing." Her tone softened. "Your nutrition sharing initiative has been officially adopted as Academy policy. From this point forward, all species' biological needs will be properly accommodated." As Professor Kale departed, Mason looked at Lyra with a grin. "Not bad for a couple of primitive species, huh?" Lyra's markings pulsed with gentle amusement. "Indeed, though, if memory serves, none of this would have happened if you hadn't said those simple words that first day." Mason chuckled. "What, come eat with me? It just felt like the right thing to do. Where I'm from, we don't let people go hungry if we can help it." Lyra tilted her head thoughtfully. "A simple principle," she mused. "Yet, when applied with consistency, it changes everything." In the days that followed, word of the human who shared his food with a starving alien spread across the Academy and beyond. It became more than a story. It became a symbol. A reminder that progress doesn't come from forcing others to conform, but from learning how to accommodate and understand one another. The new collaborative xenoscience track flourished. Students from dozens of worlds joined, drawn by the promise of shared discovery. Mixed species research teams began producing breakthroughs that single-species groups had failed to achieve for centuries. 6 months later, Mason and Lyra stood side by side on the observation deck of the Academy's highest tower, watching the violet sun sink beneath the horizon of Nexus Prime. Below them, the campus looked transformed. New buildings shimmered with adaptive climate panels. Gardens bloomed with crops from 100 worlds. Students of every species sat together in the courtyards, laughing, debating, learning. Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed, Mason said, leaning on the railing. All because of a simple lunch. Lyra smiled, her skin glowing faintly in the evening light. Not just a lunch, Mason. It was the recognition of a basic truth, that compassion isn't a weakness, it's a foundation. That real progress begins when we stop expecting others to suffer for the sake of tradition. She turned toward him, her voice quiet but steady. My people have a saying. The greatest journeys begin with the smallest steps. You took one that day, and its ripples have reached farther than either of us could have imagined. Mason's gaze softened as memories of that first encounter filled his mind. The frightened Solaran girl in the cafeteria, the awkward conversation, the simple act of sharing a meal. Now she stood beside him as an accomplished xenoscientist admired throughout the academy for her intellect and empathy. He smiled. We make a good team. Lyra returned the smile. Indeed we do, and I suspect our work is only just beginning. As the last rays of the purple sun vanished below the skyline, they stood together in easy silence, two beings from distant worlds who had found common ground in the most human of gestures, sharing food with someone in need. Far below, the grand cafeteria buzzed with life. Students from every corner of the Alliance sat together, their meals adapted for every physiology, every taste, every culture. Where once there had been separation and scorn, now there was curiosity and respect. It wasn't perfect. Centuries of habit don't vanish overnight. But it was a start. And sometimes, a start is all it takes to change the universe. If you listened all the way through, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback means the world to us. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and check out the next one waiting for you on the screen. Big hug, and see you in the next chapter of DystoHFY.